Well, hello. Hello, Dave. Are you there?
I am indeed.
Good. Welcome. Award would like to start by acknowledging and paying our respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which we broadcast today. Award would also like to acknowledge their culture of storytelling through art, dance, and music. And we pay respects to the elders past, present, and future on other lands throughout all communities who might be participating today. Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to Work Behind the Work, brought to you by Award with the support of Google. I'm Jonathan Kneeban from the Glue Society, and today I'm representing the chair, Cam Blackley, and the entire award committee. This is the third session of four, actually, where we get an insight into the process, inspiration, and creative journey of various multi-award winning projects from this year's awards. And I've very much enjoyed the sessions thus far. I know a lot of you have, and the response has been fantastic. And I'm pretty sure, in fact, I know today's session is going to be equally inspiring. Just so you're aware, this session is being recorded and it will be made available later via usual channels through the award website, etc. As previously, if you're watching us live, then you do have the chance to add your questions, which we'll get to in the second half of the session. And you can just add them to the Q&A box in the bottom of your screen. But to kickstart this session, I am going to hand over to Dave Bowman, the better half, if you don't mind me saying so, of Dave Bowman and Matty Burton, the team from Google. And by way of introduction, Dave's basically and Matty have worked together for over 20 years in multiple creatively led companies in different parts of the world. And according to their bios, apparently they worked at the Glue Society, but I can't really remember that ever being the case. Droga 5 in New York, TBWA Sydney, so at least they went to some decent places after us. And later they founded Special Group in Australia, which is obviously going from strength to strength at the moment. They currently lead Google Pi. I think that is. It's not PI, is it? As in private investigator, it's Pi.
It's usually Pi, but I think the Magnum angle sounds good.
A team of creative software engineers, producers, and business partners who help to make Google technology accessible, useful, exciting, and inspiring for the 4.8 billion users across Asia-Pacific region. No mean feat. Throughout their advertising career, they've been recognized at the highest levels in industry award shows and beyond. And, I'm obviously very proud to call them mates and friends, and amazing to have seen what they've achieved. Most recently, they've been working all around the world on projects like the Google I/O, the World AI Conference in Shanghai, the Mobile World Congress, Berlin Open Air Tech Festival, and the UNESCO World Summit on Language Technology. So lots going on, and I'm sure lots happening with our current COVID situation to deal with. But anyway, over to you, Dave. Thanks for sponsoring this session, and I'll chat later.
Thank you, JK. I must say I also don't really remember working at the Glue Society. I'm told it was about 3 years, but it was a blur. A fantastic blur, though, I should say. Learned a lot and had a lot of fun doing it. It's a fantastic honour and opportunity for me personally to be able to spend some time with three legends and then the wider community. Thank you again, JK, for the wonderful wrap-up of what we're going to be trying to do today. And it's my job to be able to formally welcome Brett Colliver and Mike Felix, two legends of the industry. They both began their careers at DDB New Zealand, but they did not work together there initially. Brett went on to work at Clems Melbourne and Colenso, his biggest claim to fame being DB's Brutrolium campaign. Mike went on to work at Burnett's in Sydney and Droga 5 in New York, where his claim to fame was living so close to the agency he could hold his breath and get to work without passing out. That's what I'm told. In late 2015, Brett called Mike out of the blue to pop the question, as it were, and to see if Mike would like to work together as a CD team back at DDB New Zealand. And they spent the last 4 years there working on campaigns like Rescam, Steinlager's Fight for Territory, and Lotto's Imagine campaign. And in 2019, they were ranked the 20th creative directors in the world by the Big One rankings. So a phenomenal career that is still very much in flight. And today we get to hear all about one of their recent and much lauded campaigns. So I might hand over now, and we can revisit afterwards for lots of questions. If you've got them, please put them forward, type them out, and then we'll see if we can tackle as many as possible at the back end of the presentation.
Hello.
Hey guys, thanks for that.
We get straight into it, do we?
Yep, why not?
Okay. 1 moment. Let's do it. Sorry for this painful setup, everyone. I'm just getting through. I didn't want to ask, can you see my screen? But can you see everything okay, Mike? Or is it still?
Yeah, but you can see the presentation.
Okay, here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Sorry about that painful start to our presentation on Lotto New Zealand's Lost campaign. I assume if you're watching, you're familiar with the work, but just as a quick recap, Lost was the 4th installment of Lotto's Imagine platform. And every 18 months or so, we create a big emotional story in the form of a TV ad that brings the imagined thought to life in a new way. This time, though, we wanted to do something a little bit different. So we decided to make a Lotto TV ad that was also a Lotto ticket. For anyone who doesn't know, the premise of the ad is that a flight attendant wins Lotto only to lose her ticket while she's on a layover in Bangkok. That's only half the idea, because throughout the spot, there were also Lotto numbers lost throughout the scenes. This meant that the hero of the ad was frantically searching for her ticket. The audience was searching for one of their own, with a cash jackpot up for grabs. And then to help people in their search, we gave out clues each week across social media and even on the live national draw. All of which sounds pretty simple, right? Of course it does. Because when you've seen a piece of work at an award show, you get the perfectly curated version of the story, the perfect solution to the perfect problem. To an outsider, it always appears that you've pulled off a 2.5 twisting, laid out Yurchenko vault. But we all know the reality is anything but. There's a million hurdles to jump through, a million bombs to defuse, and a million twists and turns. A lot of things need to line up. And the truth is, making a good piece of work is a lottery. Now, to win the lottery, you need 7 balls to line up. So we thought with that in mind, we'd take you through the 7 balls that had to line up for us to make Lost.
So the first ball that we're going to talk about is the story. Now the odds of landing on a great script or a single Lotto ball are about the same. They're about 1 in 40. And that's about the amount of scripts that we had on the table. But which script is the right one? In an effort to skew the odds in our favour, we turned to the late great Kurt Vonnegut for advice. Now, when he was at uni, Dirty Curdy was laughed off campus for suggesting that if you inputted every story that has ever been told into a computer, it would spit out only 6 different story arcs. Every story ever told would fit into one of these 6 arcs. The technology wasn't available at the time, but when the experiment was conducted later, it proved his theory right. There was rags to riches, riches to rags, man in a hole. But the arc that seemed to pay out the best odds of creating a popular story was called Cinderella. Now, you may remember that it doesn't start out great for Cinderella, but her chores are swept aside when her fairy godmother appears in classic Deus Ex Machina style and whips up a little spell so Cinderella can go to the ball. And in our story, an exhausted flight attendant who is away from her family suddenly wins Lotto. But joy's a canapé, not a main dish. And when the clock strikes midnight, it's all over for Cinderella. So we needed a pumpkin moment for our character. We needed her to lose her ticket somehow. So in a race to return to the airport to share her good tidings with her family, our character would crash his scooter, break her arm, and lose the ticket. We were even going to have a loser shoe in the crash, just as a shout out to old mate Cinderella. Now Cinderella has to go back to the grind. But the memory of that night makes life a little more bearable, and as our character returns to her life, she finds her friends and family have rallied around her. She sees what really matters in life, and she has a great story to tell. But to complete the Cinderella arc, we needed one last thing. We needed the slipper to fit, and our character to go into that fairy tale happy ever after territory. Claire needed to find her ticket again, but how? Now the answer actually surprised us, which is good. If the twist surprises the writers, it will probably surprise the audience. And we were literally holding up our hands wondering where the ticket could be. And then we looked at our arms and we go, bingo. The ticket has been in the cast the whole time. The nurse who attended to her in the Thai hospital found the ticket and hid it in the cast to keep it safe. Slipper fits. We had our first ball.
Here comes your first ball. We make our way to a pretty important step here. The first one you need is number 4.
But there was just one problem. The client had already bought a script called Ponies. Now, we were sure they were going to buy one of our other scripts, but Ponies it was. So the second ball that needed to fall into place was the sell, or in this case, the unsell. Before we get into that though, let's rewind just a little bit. A few months before this brief came in, the marketing team at Lotto had changed, and as is often the case when that happens, the account was put up for pitch. But thankfully, we managed to retain the account, and much of the decision to remain at DDB was based on the results of the previous Imagine ad called Armoured Truck, which had won a couple of golds at this show last year, but more importantly, had been embraced by the public. So that meant that the new clients respected our opinion on what ad they should actually make. And we were a little worried that Ponies might not quite reach the bar that had been set. So in a mad rush, we ran away. We wrote a whole bunch of new scripts, not quite as many as on the table you saw earlier, but a whole bunch more. And one of them we were a lot more confident in. But convincing the client that Ponies wasn't the answer wouldn't prove easy. You see, both clients had grown up with Ponies. They loved Ponies. And this is where Damon comes in. Everyone knows that it takes a good CCO to sell work. But the thing is, it takes a great one to unsell something that's already been bought. Well, people talk often about horse whisperers in metaphorical terms, but in this case, we figured it was actually a lot more literal, because somehow Damon did it. Of course, the other side to the equation is that it takes a great client to be open to such a big change. So we have to give full credit to the Lotto team for actually taking the plunge on changing the script at that late stage. Anyway, we didn't ask too many questions, but whatever transpired on the day, the Ponies had been dropped off at the glue factory and replaced with the script called Crash. That's right, at this point the script was still called Crash, but ball 2 had fallen into place.
Await your second ball out, which is number 18 tonight.
There was just one little problem. The script might have been called Crash, but we couldn't afford to make an ad with a crash in it, especially if that crash required an overseas shoot. So the third ball that had to fall into place was the budget. Now, the price of almost anything you can think of goes up every year. The price of houses, or coffee, or paninis. But not ad budgets. Ad budgets are the only thing in the universe that seems to go down every year. But sometimes a problem is just what you need. We realized that the only way to get enough budget to do the ad justice was to roll every external budget we could find into the main TV asset and use the main shoot to create everything. And then we were like, well, what if the ad, the Lotto ad, was actually a Lotto ticket? What if we had Lotto numbers throughout the ad that people needed to find to create their ticket? To cover the cash prize, we can use Lotto's promotional prize budget for advertising-related prizes, which is separate from the production budget. This way, it's not just the character who is searching for the winning ticket, but the audience as well. Now, every mother knows that most babies come out upside down, and this was no different. But we finally had our idea and our third ball.
Here's your third ball. It is 27.
There was just one problem. We couldn't legally do it, which is why the fourth ball that needed to line up was the harm team. Now, if you've worked in anything related to alcohol or gambling, you'll understand that there's plenty of rules and regulations around those industries. And even though Lotto is 100% not-for-profit, created for the sole purpose of funding community initiatives, they're still considered a gambling organisation, so there's lots and lots of legal considerations. And the idea that a Lotto ad was also a Lotto ticket wasn't sitting overly well with the harm team. Now you're probably asking why? Well, there were two main concerns. One was that Lotto draws understandably have rigorous security protocols around them. We needed to prove that our draw wasn't going to be compromised by hackers or otherwise. And then the other concern was that it was crucial that people understand the ticket they were finding in the ad was for a special standalone draw, not for the regular weekly draw. Now, we knew we could get around these concerns easily enough, but realizing that everything was riding on this one approval, we didn't really want to rely on a nice keynote presentation to get the harm team over the line. So instead, Mike decided to stake out the lunchroom at Lotto's headquarters. And he waited in the shadows, and he waited, until the guy in the harm team who was responsible for making the call finally appeared. Now, I'm not sure what Mike said or did to that man, but he came back with legal approval. However, Mike couldn't permanently set up in Lotto's lunchroom, so this wouldn't be the last time we'd hear from the harm team. Not long afterwards, it came to our attention that Harm felt we shouldn't have the crash in the ad at all. Of course, there was one fairly glaring problem with that opinion, which is that we needed to break the main character's arm so that we could have a nurse hide the ticket in her arm cast. Now, I guess we could have had go to a full moon party, get blackout drunk, and then wake up in hospital with a broken arm, but somehow that seemed even less likely to fly. So we really needed to solve this crash situation. And this is where the value of a great production partner comes into play. There's always going to be a gap between what's on the page and what ends up on screen. And often what's worrying people before the shoot isn't necessarily how the final product ends up looking, but it can still be tricky to navigate those waters pre-shoot. But luckily we were working with Scoundrel. Now, Tim Bullock has directed the previous Armoured Truck ad, and anyone who's worked with him will know that he's about as all in as a director gets. So Tim, the Scoundrel team, and I'm guessing a lot of other people behind the scenes went into overdrive to find a solution that would not only get the crash into the ad, but avoid all the any complaints of recklessness. From camera angles and clever editing tricks, those two things were obviously a massive help. But perhaps the biggest thing was what the scooter actually crashed into. At one point, I think we had the scooter crashing into a truck, which in hindsight might have been a little too extreme. But by simply changing it to a fruit stand, suddenly the whole scenario became palatable. Anyway, a combo of all of these things answered the safety concerns of the harm team, the crisis was averted, and Ball 4 was now in place.
Win for you must be one tonight. 25 is the fourth number out.
Awesome.
Now, what you're looking at is a picture of me in Thailand during the first day of the shoot. A paramedic attends to me as I suffer from heat stroke. It's 3 in the morning. So it was in this sweaty coma that I would stumble back into the hot little room with a split, straight into a fight between the client and the agency and the production company over the crash scene. You see, the harm team had given us the all clear on seeing the scooter swerve out of the way of a tuk-tuk, because a tuk-tuk didn't imply serious damage, probably because it has a silly name. But at the shoot, the stunt was being done with a car, not a tuk-tuk. Because the production company in Thailand, Living Films, who are amazing by the way, refused to do the stunt with a tuk-tuk because tuk-tuk brakes are, well, tuk-tuk brakes, and someone could get killed. It was an interesting realization that subjective danger perceived by a legal team and real danger are not the same things. Just as an aside, tuk-tuk is an automatic payet word that sounds like a two-stroke engine. But it was a tense moment. But in the end, the thing that solved all of our problems in Thailand by jumping in to add a little levity or a timely distraction was this. They're called yardom, but we didn't know that at the time. We just called them snorters. And snorters are nasal inhalers and a bit of a cultural phenomenon in Thailand. They're basically a cocktail of menthol, eucalyptus, and borneol, and are exactly what you need to get through a 50-hour shoot with no sleep in the damp, baking hot back streets of Thailand. Now, while we were doing lethal doses of eucalyptus in Thailand, back in New Zealand, our lead developer was building a prototype for the digital experience and realized that if we were having a lot of traffic coming through Facebook, we would need to work with Facebook's anemic version of Safari, which couldn't rotate. This would mean that we'd need to make sure the experience was brilliant in portrait and felt like a premium engaging UX, even on the low-rent browser. The next challenge was that we needed the code to be, the next challenge was we needed to make sure that the code to the numbers could not be found in the front-end code, or else people could just open it up and find it on their browser. So we frame-tracked each number location so that even web devs couldn't find it in the code. The downside of doing this would have been performance because of the crappy version of Safari, thanks again Facebook. So we caged with Cloudflare. And it's lucky we did. As the campaign went live, we were registered well over 10 million click events, and our server would have crashed had we not buffered it. But our production ball was in place.
Here's your fifth ball. It's 30
At least we thought it was. But you guessed it, there was just one problem. We'd dispatched the ad with 7 numbers hidden throughout it, and everything seemed to be going well. Until Lotto told us that an intern at their office had found an extra number that we'd missed. In the lead up to dispatch, we'd had a room full of people combing every frame to make sure there were no extra numbers. I mean, the whole intro mechanic relied on this, so of course we sweated over it. We'd watched it forwards, we'd watched it backwards. We even divided it into some weird sort of grid system, like a weird crime scene. So if there's one thing you take away from today, it's probably that if you ever get murdered, you'd better hope that we're not the detectives on your case, because there it was. A big 2, right in the middle of frame. But what could we do? Could we call the ad back from the networks? No, it was too late for that. So we were kind of stumped. But it turns out our luck hadn't run out just yet. If you watch the real Lotto draw, they give a bonus ball, which is actually part of the mechanic of the game. And so suddenly, our game had a bonus ball, just like the real draw.
Because we love to make winning happen, here's the bonus ball. This can boost your winnings in divisions 2, 4, and 6. Your bonus tonight, 37.
And it wasn't all uphill battles. It is at this point that we need to mention our internal accounts and production teams, because any one of them could be doing this talk instead of us. I think the secret to making good work is good relationships with people who are as excited as you are to be on the ride. And the benefit of a long-running campaign like this that people actually seem to like is that doors open for you. We never had to ask for PR. Journalists for the Herald were already asking when the new Imagine ad was coming out. So we used that interest to our advantage. We purposefully launched the ad without revealing that there was anything more to it. Within 2 weeks, the ad became voted as New Zealand's favourite in the TRA ratings, but we still waited a full month before revealing to the media that the ad had anything else going on and that it was really a ticket. So we let the media run their second story, and then we announced it on the live draw. Now, every successful campaign is a bit like push-starting a car. At first, it's impossible to get anyone to see merit in it or help, but it is only when others get excited and start pushing that it actually takes off. The moment we realized we might have something big was the moment we found out that we would be able to work with the live lotto draw on primetime television. They even themed the set and presenter outfit around the Lost theme. The idea was now moving on its own momentum. We were writing scripts for the presenters to not just reveal the idea, but to reveal clues to the location of the different lotto numbers each week. If you've never done it before, live TV is something different altogether. There's no offline, online stages, no take twos, no fixing it in the edit. Everything from dialogue to graphics is final and brought together in one performance. It's more like conducting an orchestra than a film shoot. Now, of course, these people they watch the draw every week. And the person who was in charge of the draw, her first day on the job, all of her numbers came up, including the Powerball, during rehearsal. So it didn't count. But unlike her, luck was on our side, and ball 6 was in place.
Now, believe it or not,
History making
it weren't
all
any more
important.
problems.
Sixth number is number
6 balls had
28.
lined up, and we'd got lost out into the world. But in a lotto draw, 6 balls doesn't get you the jackpot. It gets you a decent win, but what you really need is the Powerball. The Powerball is the thing that multiplies your winnings tenfold. So there were still a couple of extra things required before that ball would fall into place for us. First, the campaign results started to roll in, and you never really know how these things are going to go and how they're going to be received in the world until you get them out there. But this one certainly seemed to get people's attention. We had 53,000 successful entries, and that's 53,000 people that managed to actually complete the full entry and find all of the numbers. And it's 53,000 people who went through our ad, took the time to go through it frame by frame and actually hunt down all of these numbers. And that's just the ones who finished. There were thousands more who didn't actually manage to find them all. From a sales perspective, the campaign set records for what are called low jackpot weeks. And I know that term probably sounds a bit weird, but low jackpot weeks are actually the most important weeks to drive sales. When jackpots are high, tickets kind of sell themselves, but low jackpots is when we're really having to work hard to drive these sales. And in the 6 months following the release, there was a 7% increase in overall sales versus the client target of 1%. So by all measures, it was having a great impact out in the world. But industry recognition is also important. So we had to run that gauntlet. And while the public's reaction is hard to predict, I think a lot of us know that award juries can be even more fickle. You never know who's going to be in the room, what the tastes of the jury are going to be, or who or what you're up against. But thankfully, Jeff Goodby and his fellow film jurors liked this idea. Or, I guess alternatively, they just couldn't see straight anymore and had enough of arguing, and so said, let's give this lost thing some golds and go home. But either way, the final ball, the Powerball, had fallen into place.
This is a moment we've all been waiting for. So, good luck,
And
New Zealand. Here we go
those
tonight.
are the 7
all-important
balls
Powerball
that
number
lined up in the
is
creation of
number
Lost.
3.
The reason we wanted to share this with you today is to hopefully give you a helpful reminder that there's always more to a piece of work than you see in the video. Kurt Vonnegut, that guy Mike talked about at the very beginning, might have known a lot about story arcs, but he had zero clue about the advertising arc, because while his were very neat, I think everyone in this industry knows that ours usually look a lot more like this. There's always hurdles, there's always twists and turns, some you plan for, some you simply can't plan for. But we think the crucial thing is to be open to the unexpected things that happen along the way, to stay flexible when something goes a little off track. And that doesn't just apply to creatives, that applies to everyone who's involved in the process. As long as the whole team is vigorously protective of the core of the idea, stay open to curveballs along the way, because sometimes they actually make the outcome much, much better. And as I touched on earlier, full credit to our client for embracing that philosophy. As you've seen, there were lots of things that could have derailed this campaign, but it wouldn't have mattered how hard we tried if the client hadn't been willing to actually navigate those hurdles with us. And the last point I guess we want to make is just make sure you do enjoy it on those special occasions when everything does manage to line up, because it really is a lottery. And with that said, we'll hand over back to Maddie and Dave for any questions. And thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. That was fantastic. JK and I might sort of bounce off each other with a few questions and throw to the audience too. It was a fantastic look under the hood at something that felt, when it entered the world, quite simple, but clearly was anything but at every single stage behind the scenes.
Yeah.
I've personally got a million questions I'd like to ask. I'll start with one though. I think for obvious reasons, most, if not all clients like reliability and like a plan. And obviously, marketing parlance is what's the marketing plan, not what's the marketing crazy experiment that hasn't been done before. Can you talk a little bit, I suppose, a little bit about how the unsell happened and how you were able to, I suppose, get a client to maybe not fall out of love with something that they were already into, but take this leap with you and the wider team and I suppose embark on a real risk. I mean, it's very successful, and it's magnetic to see how it unfolded. I could totally see how any consumer in the real world would just look at that and be kind of magnetized by this thing, and how different it is to most other stuff you sort of see out and about. But could you talk to us about what that looked like up close?
Yeah, well, it's there's probably some conversations that Damon had and some ways he used particular Jedi tricks, but at the end of the day, it just came down to a good relationship. And even though it was quite a new relationship, so we had, and that's why Brett had talked about the pitch leading up to it, because it wasn't one moment of unselling. It was weeks of a relationship building, so that, we'd brought them along to Effie's with us, and Lotto, the armoured truck work, had a really big night at Effie's for that. And we'd just gone through a pitch, and you feel really, it's like having a pitch is like going through an all-night lockdown with someone. So afterwards there's a certain kind of feel, and because a pitch is a bit of a chaotic process for them as well, they were probably used to things change and ideas develop and ideas happen. But I think something that we're forgetting is, at the end of the day, they still would have got a story, they still would have got a TV ad. Had we not done any of the extra stuff, they would have still got a TV ad. So in a way, it was really just a build on what they were already doing, than necessarily trying to convince them to do something crazy. It's like, well, hey, if this doesn't work out, we've still got an ad at the end of the day. But I do think that it is the relationship that's happened between them that's been the big thing. And I can't say enough about our suits and how they conduct it. Kate, for example, Kate Lyons, is probably the best person to present to in the world. And so when you present to someone and the cackling and the energy is there, and you've got a lot of, it's not nerves when you're dealing with Lotto and you're dealing with Lotto people, it's a lot of excitement. Now, if somebody came up to you and said, we think you should buy this idea, and their hand's shaking, then you're not going to buy it. If somebody comes up to you and goes, you got to shake, and their head's shaking, then you buy it.
I suppose their business model is built on risk too, so it's kind of probably a degree of preaching to the converted. Can you tell us what was in the pony ad?
No, we can't, because we've got this bottom drawer of that's like 1 million miles long, and one day we might pull out ponies, and you guys will go, ponies.
Ah, now we see.
Short answer, there were lots of ponies in the ponies ad. we can't give away too many details.
It's the first question you start to think, though, isn't it? Which is, okay, I want to know what the one you had to try and undo. Now, it's really interesting, though. The one of the things I think that I remember Steve Henry once telling me when I was working at Hal Henry, he goes, when we were young, we used to just send the account director off to go and sell our idea, and we would say to them, go and try and sell that, you fucker kind of thing. You know, go and have a laugh trying to sell that, and then they realised that actually they would never make any work if their idea wasn't bought. So it was about working with the team to get everyone excited. But I think one thing that creatives are perhaps not as good as they should be is creating a relationship and a rapport with the client, so that they get this sort of shared goal and shared agenda and shared enjoyment of creativity. We kind of blame them for not buying good ideas, but I don't think we spend enough time getting them excited about enjoying ideas. So you know, obviously in an early relationship, it's hard to create a rapport, but it sounds like something you've developed now, and it's only going to get better from here on in.
Yeah, I would say, I'm sure you guys have met Damon before, right? He's when you say in the short term of this relationship, he was probably the one mostly involved in that at that stage. But he is one of those fairly instantly lovable kind of guys anyway, just like a big teddy bear. So I'm sure there weren't too many barriers to that relationship being formed early on. And yes, I guess we have hopefully built a lot of trust already as we've been going along through various projects. I guess that comes from lots of different things as well. It's caring about every level of the work, not just the big Imagine ad every 18 months or so. It's all of the promo work that comes through and the smaller pieces as well. It's I think we had a few tense-ish, as you do on shoot, kind of conversation. So making sure that everyone knew that everyone cared about every layer of that is important. So it's really an accumulation, I think, is the only way to do it, right? As far as building trust with a client, you can't just flick it on.
Yeah, it's interesting though. You know, as a director or a production company walking into a room where there's an agency and a client for a pre-production meeting, it's so palpable as to how strong that bond and connection is. And you know, if there's any tension, you immediately sense it. But I would say, you know, it sounds like if you're having honest conversations, that's the only way you can be, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, and nothing brings out the honesty like staring at a split at 3 a.m. in Bangkok when everyone's on these weird time zones.
So through terrible things plus enough time equals hilarious kind of and relationship building kind of exercise.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I think there's something really interesting about this campaign in that it, firstly, obviously doesn't feel like an ad, which seems like a really obvious thing to say, but I kind of feel like you naturally set yourself an advantage immediately by creating something that people aren't sure where to box it. You know, it's like, I know it's trying to talk to me to advertise something in a way, but it's not a traditional ad. It's not just a film. It's also not just a promo. It's also not just a series of kind of live reads as part of the program. I think that's always fascinating, just as an experiment. It must have been super tense though, right as you were launching it. We've had a little bit of a kind of common theme with some of the other stuff that's come through in the work behind the work in that moment, right as you're sort of setting it out into the world. What was that like for you and the client and the kind of wider team, just sort of that fingers crossed moment of going, all right, how's this going to go?
We've had some of our best work completely finished and then get pulled before it through, you know, external factors. So I don't think you don't ever feel like you relax. So I'm not sure where that moment is. You know, when you go like, oh, there's supposed to be that moment, right? I'm almost still waiting for it. Because anything can happen. You can put it out there now. And we live when I started in advertising, when we all started in advertising, it was so different. It did feel a bit more one way. You know, there was more of the living room moment and everybody was watching and they were all focused on the TV, and then you couldn't pick up your little Black Mirror here and send a nasty message about it. And we're in this very strange time where we have to be so careful about what we're making, and you have to be so prescient and aware of what might be said, and then how can you react to it, and what's this going to be, and how can you react to it. So to share a little story on that, some people noticed that the numbers are obviously circled on her ticket, but they didn't see her circle the numbers. Now, we had planned for her to, when she wins, to have a pen with her to fill in that ellipsis or to fill it out at the thing. But after you've been up for 40 hours, you know, or it was, I don't know, it was day 2 of the shoot, and we knew we had to have it in there, but we also couldn't fit it into the edit at the end. So you're gonna have some issues in there. You can bet on it. And then will people pull it up? When people pull it up, what are you gonna do and say? So there was a cute little interactive kind of promotion thing that happened that the digital team whipped up to be able to, when people mentioned that, to be able to interact with them. So turning your foibles into, you know, little opportunities for back and forward is something that we never used to be able to do, but it's an added level of complexity that we now have to think about.
No, that's really smart. I think what you've just said, Mike, the getting into the headspace of the audience, and they're not a passive receiver anymore. They're you know, in an ideal world, they're actively involved. There's a question actually that's come in that plays to this point. It's a really good one, I think. It's basically saying ideas like this take faith that people will want to get involved. How did you need to convince them people would want to engage with this game, with this extra layer? You know, how did you need the incentive of a prize? Did you know, how did you kind of reassure yourselves that people would want to join in?
Do we ever really know?
It's a different conversation, isn't it? Because suddenly the success of the creative idea is that much more on the line in a way for us as creative people.
Yeah.
When success is judged as participation.
I think you can actually overlap with the previous answer a little bit with this one, that we weren't quite dancing on the knife that, say, the Uber Eats guys were 2 weeks ago, where it was make or break in that very moment when something went live. We had the ad out in the world for a month. And I guess our parachute was, if something was really going badly, we didn't have to reveal the hidden numbers. It could have just been an ad that lived out there in the world. So in the same way, there was a security blanket or a parachute or whatever we want to call it, the promotion side of it, the activation side of it, that yes, we wanted people to get involved. Yes, it made the idea so much better. And we always suspected they would, just because of the nature of it. A, there's a big prize to be won. B, it's a bit of fun. And C, it wasn't asking a huge amount from people. It's sort of tough to search through, but you jump on your phone or computer and you can do it. So having said all that, even if no one had done it, the client still had a big, beautiful story, which is what they'd always done in the medium they'd always been in. So there wasn't really a fail version to it. It just would have been people would get involved if they had.
Dave and I can relate to this because we had a similar situation of a Virgin ad we did where we, at the very last minute, decided to put a phone number on.
Yeah.
We had no idea people were going to ring.
If you remember, the Virgin, yeah. 3, so Virgin 8, and it had about, some poor person got about 60,000 phone calls, like residential number in a weekend before we realised what was going on.
Yeah.
The things you learn afterwards. I mean, like, just on that, I think, and JK, you're probably in a unique position to kind of speak to this, actually. There's something really interesting about the handover moment that you talked about between a creative agency and a production partner. And I know it's never truly a kind of, there you go, but there is that moment of kind of, we've gone as far as we can for the minute without involving the production process. And then there's almost a new kind of stewardship that happens. And you've obviously, you know, for years now existed on both sides of that as an individual. You're directing, you're writing, you're running kind of production and kind of events and installation stuff. Like, how do you best juggle that as someone who's kind of created an idea, you've managed to unsell another idea, you've sold in your idea, you've started moving towards production, and then you bring on a partner. How do you manage that process and kind of stay involved enough to affect it, but give enough control to your new partners to be able to breathe life into it.
You guys going to go or me?
Question for you, I think.
Well, I mean, from my point of view, if you're coming in as the sort of the people who are helping to bring an idea to life and help do it justice and bring, you know, help it to reach its truest potential, I do think the most important thing is to really understand what the creative team love about the thought. And what essentially what the client likes about it as well. I think sometimes those are different, and I do think there can be a bit of a juggling act there. But I think the most important thing is to get to the heart of what in this instance you guys would have really, you know, what's the bit that's going to make you feel that you've done the idea justice, and I think your job then is to really, just like a midwife or whatever, just make sure the delivery goes smoothly and that everyone's thrilled with the results. You know, I think obviously there's an opportunity to bring some of those restrictions that happen with budgets and things like that and solve them creatively. And in a way, I think most directors like having restrictions really secretly, because it means they have to think of solutions, and it actually helps give them ideas. Just like you get, you know, in the creative process, restrictions are useful sometimes, you know, like the legal issues. So I think it's just sharing what the problems are, enjoying what the opportunities are, but also really getting to the heart of why you loved the idea in the first place, why the team loved the idea in the first place, and really making sure that's the thing that ends up getting delivered properly. I don't know. Does that answer the question? I hope so.
No, it definitely does. I mean, I'd love to know, just on that last point, if there were some moments, Brett and Mike, where you almost made something different. And I don't mean the pony ad. I mean within that structure where you almost went down a different road and then had to kind of steer yourself back onto what was the best iteration of that concept as you saw it.
You know, we watched we've watched the different behind the scenes leading up to this, and I think we both really loved the idea of glass and clay in the Uber Eats chat that Jules was talking about, and that's what they use. And it makes so much sense. You have the glass you can't touch because that's going to break. And you have the clay, of course, that you can mold. And, you know, Jonathan, what you were just saying before is basically if you agree with the creative team on the glass, and then you're the clay that makes everything around it. But when Brett and I were talking about it afterwards, we said, that's true sometimes, but often it's not the creative team together in a shower having a joint epiphany. It's like sweeping up dust in an alleyway. So some ideas, the glass is really easy to see, but sometimes you don't know where the glass is necessarily until like further into it. So would this have been different through the process? Yes, absolutely. But it was that we were able to see it at one point. As soon as we kind of were like, it's a lotto ad, that's also a ticket. That's what helped us. Like, if it wasn't that, then we wouldn't have been happy with it, because the story linked into that concept. Everything had to link into that concept.
I think
so it could have been something different than that once we established that's what it had to be.
And actually, interesting you say that, because you could have gone off the rails if you had focused too much on the second half, on that happens to be a lotto ticket, because in the wrong hands, you wouldn't have had a great lotto ad.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And you know what Tim did brilliantly for you, and you guys, the smart thing you did was to make sure that the thing people were engaging with was already entertaining and engaging and involving and surprising and delightful. And sometimes we get carried away with the second half. We get carried away with the bit that feels modern and new, and that's the only bit that matters. And shit, that's, if you know, it's the fact that it's lotto numbers But if you just did the second half, you would have ended up with a very different
Yeah.
result.
It's funny with tattoos. You know, you never get an idea in a tattoo because as soon as someone else does it, it sucks. So you always just get designs. But so, you know, as soon as an idea is done more than once, it becomes a gimmick. But storytelling is not something that you can gimmick. It is something that's universal. And so you're absolutely right, Jonathan. And that's kind of, I guess, why it happened the way it did. The main thing we're trying to do here is tell a great story. If that happens to have a beautiful twist to it, then great. But as soon as Sweden did a lotto ad that was also a ticket, it would be a gimmick. It would cheapen the whole thing and the glass would break.
I think that's a great observation, because I think sometimes we forget that that world is about entertaining, not just entertaining a jury of our peers who kind of chin stroke and say, well, that's clever. But the average person who could be completely disinterested in the message that you're trying to get out there, and that challenge of trying to warm someone up with a story and a lateral bit of thinking and kind of, I don't know, almost tempt them in before you then have that other really smart layer come out, I think is phenomenal. I do agree that glass and clay analogy I think is fantastic. I think it articulates really beautifully something that every creative person has felt at various times, when you can see someone else is doubling down on the bit that you weren't into and trying to sort of cut off the thing that was the shining light for you. And sometimes it happens very slowly, and over the course of the process, you're just sort of left with kind of nothing of what you'd hoped. So it's tricky, a conversation particularly to have with a client, and then particularly with a client at the beginning of a relationship, that's even harder. I think one of the things that came up in previous sessions was the work that happens in pitches rarely gets made, because it's kind of almost a display of what you're capable of, and it's like, now because we don't really know each other very well, let's go back to something a bit safer, I suppose. Sorry, Jonathan, you were going to go.
No, I was just going to pick up on the fact that I think there is a re-interest emerging in sort of the capabilities of storytelling rather than novelty for novelty's sake. I do sense that. I don't know whether you guys feel that, but
yeah,
the storytelling for. Can you just repeat that bit? Sorry, Jonathan.
All I was really saying is, I think there is a re-emergence or a new an understanding that the power of storytelling is incredible, and novelty for novelty's sake is not necessarily where it's all at. I think it's something to do with the times and our headspace and our but I think we're enjoying the beauty of like the new Apple film with the vertical cinema or something. There's just there's a novelty there, but there's also an amazing bit of storytelling going on.
Yeah, and I did really like what you were saying as well about so often, won't name and shame or anything, but so often you see those great ideas as activations or promotions or whatever they are, and the film is just a slapped on piece on the side that isn't quite. And I guess ours was, yes, it was a good standalone piece of film, a story that people connect with emotionally, but I even like down to the layer that it was intrinsically linked to the actual concept that she's searching, you're searching. It could have been any other ad that was still a big emotional story where numbers were lost, but why were the numbers lost? That was always a really important layer to us as well. So I agree that the emotional thing is making a comeback, which is good to see, I guess.
And we've got a question that's come through that said, what did success look like for this campaign? Can you share some results?
Yeah, Brett, do you want to come?
I would point out the ones we had in there, which really were the number of people who went through and managed to complete the entire thing. I can't, off the top of my head, remember the entire number of people that tried, but I think it was 3 or 4 times higher than what got through. I think it was in the hundreds of thousands. So that was great from just sheer engagement kind of level. The record sales is obviously always going to be super powerful to them. And then the hard number we have on those sales was the 7% over the 6 months. So that's 7% doesn't sound enormous until you realize that their target was only 1%. And then you go, 1% doesn't sound like much either, but then you think of how big that company is and how many tickets they sell every year. Even 1% growth is big at that level. So to beat that by 7 times was a phenomenal result to us. Beyond that, I think they're the most important sort of hard metrics, but an intangible one is really just landing another emotional. It's the 4th one now of these Imagine ads, which has connected with the entire country. It's great that every time one comes out, they're almost our equivalent of the UK Christmas kind of ads. It's in that world that people look forward to the new Lotto ad, which you can't say about many brands you get to work on. So it's,
you certainly can't
live
say
up,
that.
I guess. Live up to that was a measure of success for us as well.
Yeah, I don't think you can say that about many Lotto ads at all. So, yeah. There's a couple of questions, and I think if we've got time to get to them. What was the favorite part of the idea for the client? The film or the additional element, the lost numbers? And, are they now more open to something more complex?
Yes to both of those things. So of course, at first it was the film, because as we were talking about, the numbers was something kind of different. We weren't sure what that was going to be. So they were and the great thing about doing the Lotto ads is there was a lot of excitement around. We were going over to Thailand when we were shooting. So the process was really fun. So it was all about the film at the beginning. And we weren't sure, and they weren't sure how the results would go. But you'd said that before. How do you, what's that feeling? How do you know if something's going to be good? You don't. When we were doing Rescam, remember the developer who was building it was like, no one's going to forward you any scams. The developer, the person making it. And then a week later, we had a war room of 30 people just trying to manage it because it was so massive. So we were kind of used to having really hard meetings, having people tell you stuff you kind of don't want to hear. And that's just part of it. And so, with this, oh gosh, I completely lost your original question in my.
No, that's okay. What was the favorite part for the client?
So they were loving this. I think they were loving the film. When they saw the results and the interaction they were getting, because we were in social, the Lotto social community is very active. And so when we were doing these clues out on social, each one would have like hundreds of likes and hundreds of comments when they were talking to each other about where the things were. So they started to more and more see the value in it. I think they always just were like open, which is what's the beautiful thing about this client is they were open. They were just like, yeah, let's see how that goes. And they're like, oh, this is going great. So when we get the next brief, something like this will no doubt be baked into it.
Right.
What was it like, I suppose, from a tone and writing perspective on this challenge, when you've got such a loyal audience who are, like you say, so sort of lent into all those social channels, they're waiting for the next ad to come. They're probably used to the tone of voice that Lotto kind of has, both in comms and then also, in that broadcast moment, that's a completely different element, and you've kind of got that live quotient. How was that from a writing perspective, to have to juggle all of those sorts of things and still be credible when you're kind of, in a way, subverting the format? Was that tricky?
Do you want to take that one, Mike?
Sure.
We're talking writing?
Yeah, I think you guys kind of said it before when you said, well, we're just people, do what you'd like. I don't think you need to change how you write. You don't need to go, oh, well, because they're in this particular, they're going to be on Facebook and seeing. It's like, I'm the audience too. What would I love to see? And when we go on a story that really excites us, I think that when you're playing in the imagined world, we've been writing it for so long now, you naturally have certain tone that feels right. I've got to turn on my light. I'll do that in a second. You naturally, we wear that hat without thinking about it, I think. But when it comes to just creating something interesting, most of what you write's terrible. And so, when you find that little thing that you love, the chances of somebody else thinking it's all right are probably pretty high as well. I never overthink it.
I think that's great advice. And I think Jonathan, many years ago, I think attempted to teach Maddie and I. I don't know if it worked. That there's a certain kind of potency to creatives finding their own voice, even though they might have to take on a myriad of different brand voices. To be able to find your way of expressing yourself through that is a real art form, and the small handful of people who do it very well are incredibly successful for that very reason. So yeah, I think that's fantastic advice.
Well, I'd love to add one thing to that. I read Stephen King. I don't really like his books, but his book on writing is quite interesting. And he says you write with the door closed and you edit with the door open. And everybody has an ideal reader, someone they're writing for, or someone whose opinion they appreciate. And his is his wife, and mine is also my wife. Seriously, I'll show it to her CDs, over the time, and I'll walk away and be confused. I'll just read her and I do her a script, and I'll look at her expression, and I'll know exactly what I need to do. I just go and rewrite the whole thing. Because she'll go, oh yeah, it's pretty good. And then I'm like, sucks, start again, don't do anything.
And now you're back in lockdown. That's really high pressure.
Everybody's got their ideal reading. I'll go put on my life.
Well, there are more questions coming in, and I'm really sorry that time is up. But what I will promise is that those other questions we've got, we'll make sure that they get sent through to Mike and Brett to answer, so you do get an answer. Thanks for sending them in, and sorry that we don't have time to get to them. But and that's it for now. So all that's left for me to do is to thank everybody on behalf of Cam Blackley, our chair, and the entire award committee. First of all, thanks Brett and Mike. That was great, insightful, and one point it'd be lovely to work together. Dave and the absent Matty from Google. Love you, Matty. But thanks Dave for helping to put this on and supporting it so wonderfully. I'd like to thank Joe and Sarah, our wonderful production and support team. And thank you wherever you may be and whatever stage of lockdown you're at. Stay safe. Thanks for listening in. If you haven't already registered for next week's session about the Grave of Thrones project, make a point of it now. I have it on good authority. It's a good one. All right. Have a great weekend.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks, Jonathan, Dave.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.